But what we're seeing and finding is the ones that have more longevity are the ones that were multi-sport athletes, not the ones that specialize. So kind of going back to your comment, then the poison is in the dosage.
Hey there, welcome to our podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, could you please do us a solid? If you're enjoying what you hear, give us a 5-star rating and hit that subscribe button on your platform. It really helps us reach more parents, coaches, and youth in the youth athlete development scene. All right, let's get into this week's chat.
And it's probably the same for professional sport as well. It's like, they don't have that transitionary period, and, it's kind of like a cliff.
Yeah.
It's literally everything to nothing. It's a complete extreme.
Yes. That's one of the common things I see, man. Ex-athletes come over and they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, I don't have practice. I'm done with my sport. Like, I can't figure out what to do with my time because everything has been planned for the last 4 or 5 years. So that's one area I think we need to improve as college sports, is help these kids with transitioning out.
Yeah, and that's what I used to work at a private high school, and their philosophy was for strength and conditioning was train for the sport, not obviously train to compete, and then train for life after school as well. It was actually incorporating it as part of a health and fitness component. So if kids who aren't very, like, this is more for like not non-sporty kids, is the philosophy was this is going to help you with everyday life moving forward. But then all the sporting kids, at least they would start to learn throughout the whole process of them being in the weight room, in the gym, and with the strength coaches, this you can do this as part of your life moving forward. So they would actually start to learn how to actually maintain and look after their own health and well-being. Because like in Australia, like it's the same, it's very similar in America. We're like, Australia is like America. We're just like 5 years behind. That's the way I explain things.
Okay.
Yeah, like our childhood obesity rates, and our health is like, yes, we're one of the most educated societies in the world, but our health outcomes are really bad, like in general. So yeah. I say we're smart. We're smarter than ever before, but we're unhealthier than ever before.
We see that here, and I like that slogan, man. Train for sport, then train for life. That's a big component that's missing.
Yeah, train to compete in sport, and then win at life.
Yeah.
Then I wanted to just ask you about, in terms of how do the new kids come on board. So you've got these new freshmen. Obviously, they may have come from a program or a high school where they may not have had access to a gym, or it's very limited. Depending on what school they went to. How do you go about transitioning them and getting them up to speed with the other, with their cohort?
Yeah, you nailed it, with especially on the Olympic side, right? Football, you probably have guys that come in and lifted, and baseball to a degree, but most of the Olympic sports, they come in without any lifting experience. So we tend to separate them. So with all the sports, I'm thinking to all the strength coaches here, we tend to have like a group of our initial lifting programs. Here's my lift for returners that I've seen, that I know. Here's my lift for maybe sophomores that are a year in. They're a little bit more advanced, but they're not junior, seniors. And then we have a lifting program for freshmen and transfers that I've never seen. So going back to my philosophy of, I just want them to move well and be efficient at the movement. I'm going after the movement pattern. So on a block where I have a squat pattern, I might have my returners that I know. I give them the opportunity to be like, I need you to pick a squat that you're going to be successful at. So it might be a front, back squat, K-box squat, whatever they feel good with, that they've been able to get stronger. But then for the freshmen, I'm going to dictate what that is, like, because I want to see how they move. So I might start the entire freshman with like, you guys are on a goblet squat for the entire first month until we see how you're moving, your movement patterns. By this point, they've gone through some screening, so I kind of know some of the mobility issues. But think of it as the movements are on the lower end of the spectrum as far as easy. So returners are going to have a more challenging type of exercise, and same movement pattern for the freshmen, just a lot lighter, a lot less volume initially as well. And we're going more for movement perfection rather than weight and loading them right away. That's across the board on any type of movement that we do. Is just going to be dialed down, typically a month. Then after a month, we try to increase the intensity and start incorporating them into some of the stuff. But yeah, generally, like I said, it's 3 kind of different programs that you'll see: more advanced, junior, seniors, sophomores, and then newcomers and freshmen on something different. Conditioning, we also have a protocol that's kind of in place as well. It's our transition period protocol where, for conditioning purposes, this is running or anything assault bike, we have to do less volume for the freshmen, whether that's we either cut the reps in half or maybe we give them more time to complete an activity, or a combination of both.
Yeah. And then have you seen a difference between those who haven't lifted in high school and those who actually have lifted for a couple of years, and how their career has actually progressed as well? Because you've been with Arizona for quite a while now, so you would have seen their progression throughout the years. Is there much of a difference from those who come in little to no lifting background versus those who've had, maybe 2 to 5 years of lifting prior coming into Arizona?
It's situational. And what I mean by that is because we've had some athletes that come in and they're like, hey, yeah, I've lifted, I had a strength and conditioning class in high school, or I had a personal trainer. Sometimes it's good in some movements, but what we find, and you've probably seen this, is sometimes their movement patterns aren't great. So we have to break down their movement patterns and rebuild them from the ground up. Like, they might not have a good squat technique. So it's like, oh man, okay, well, we got to go back to like square one and rebuild this squat because they don't have good, could be bad, whatever, internal or external rotation of the hip. And maybe they've been loading it. And it's like, well, we got to take a step back now. But there's times where the kid comes in and they're lifting well, they move well, and you progress them faster. They end up moving to kind of a more advanced program right away. In terms of how they progress here, it goes back to, situational. I've seen some that have better longevity and are able to stay on the field or court longer, the ones that have some lifting experience, compared to the ones that don't. On the flip side, the bad part, I like the kids that don't have any experience, because I treat it as like a blank canvas. I'm like, sweet, we have an opportunity to teach you from zero and not pick up any bad habits. The hard part with those type of kids a lot of times is getting them to buy in and to understand what the importance of weightlifting is for their careers. So it's twofold, man.
Yeah, no, we see that in Australia as well. A lot of parents are still, I guess we have that old belief, it's like it's going to stunt your growth, and I'm just like, well, if your 12-year-old kid is carrying around a 22-pound backpack, I'm like, and they have to walk, 30 minutes to school, I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
what are we doing here? They're jumping off play equipment that's 5 feet high, multiple times throughout the day at recess and lunch. And I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like, they're already exposing themselves to large amount of forces. So definitely from the parental side of being able to invest in it, they're the ones that are likely to hold back. And they, for us in Australia, because our youngest is 9 years old. She's a little dance and cheerleader. And we've seen her technique in a lot of like back handsprings and whatnot. Like, it's been able to really like help close the gap, and especially that she's very physically active as well. We've noticed that her skill development has actually started to progress quite nicely based on the feedback of the coaches and some of the film that we've seen as well. That's a 9-year-old. Then as she starts going through the progressions, 10, 11, 12 years old, she'll be able to really accelerate through. And then because of cheerleading, and in Australia, cheerleading is it's a big deal here as well. It's starting to get a lot bigger. The training load's ridiculous. They're training 4 or 5 days per week. And obviously with dance and cheer, it's the same movement patterns again and again and again. So you're going to get this overload of certain structures and underload of other structures. So I think Kevin really, nailed it in our previous podcast is, the poisons in the dosage. If we're doing so much of a specific sport, eventually it's going to lead to some sort of like overuse and chronic issues
100%.
with the athlete. So the strength training is kind of like improve their tolerance to the load they're getting exposed to. Thus, they can actually recover faster between their sessions, and then their output from the sessions the individual sessions is going to be a lot greater moving forward as well. So it's kind of like a win-win-win across the board in that side. And some parents get it. Like doing the sport is obviously important. You'll develop, but eventually you'll hit a bit of a ceiling effect with it.
Yeah. I'm going to add to my previous answer, man, with what you just said. Honestly, I feel like this is just from my perspective, from what I've seen. The athletes that come in that have better success and longevity, a lot of times this isn't down to did they lift or not. Some, yes. Some, if they had a good trainer and they have good movement patterns, yes. But what we're seeing and finding is the ones that have more longevity are the ones that were multi-sport athletes, not the ones that specialize. So kind of going back to your comment, then the poison is in the dosage. Those that have been specialized a lot, by the time they get to us, it's not uncommon for me to be like, to hear, I already had baseball guys. I already had a UCL surgery and he's only a freshman. And soccer girls, I've had 2 ACL tears. Well, how long have you been playing? Since I was 3. So we're seeing that kids that were exposed to different sports tend to move better because they haven't overdone the same movement patterns. And they actually tend to be the ones that adapt better and a little bit faster to college athletics. And it's the ones that we have less movement issues to clean up.
Yeah, and there tends to be a lot of examples in the professional world. Like, some guys might play football, but they'll play lacrosse. Your quarterbacks that, obviously play football, but then they've got a baseball background.
Yeah.
As well. So, it's a really interesting argument. But then in terms of the future of strength and conditioning, where do you see that moving forward? Obviously, you've got the LA Games in the next 4 years, which is a big deal. Then Australia, we've got the Brisbane Games in 2032. I know in Australia, their big push is to, get more gold medals each time. Where do you see college athletics moving forward in the next, 3 to 5 years?
From strictly speaking of college athletics, man, the landscape is going to look very weird and completely different in a couple of years. I don't know if have you been keeping up with all the paid stuff with
the NIL? Yeah,
Kevin. That's thrown a huge curveball into all this because we don't know what rosters are going to look like next year. We don't know. The NCAA has already come out and said, here's the roster cap sizes. But what does that mean? How each team addresses them? That's different. That's going to look vastly different from that aspect. As far as the strength and conditioning, how we'll adapt, I think we'll just keep doing what we do, which is try to make the kids better and keep them healthy. More specifically, I see technology taking a bigger role in strength and conditioning over the next decade, man. It seems like every year there's more and more stuff, right? Like we talked about, we're now pretty heavily on force plates, and during periods of year, pretty much every strength coach in here uses Gym Aware for bar velocity stuff. And what I've learned the last couple of years is I have this technology around me that's pretty sweet, and I'm trying to use that to help me give these kids the thing that they're going to succeed at. I had a strength coach, and what I mean by that, I had a strength coach that said, I don't remember who it was, but it stood out to me a lot. He said, if your best tennis player is not one of your best weight room guys, then you're doing something wrong, because your best tennis player should be one of your best weight room guys. That doesn't mean he has to be the strongest back squatter. What it means is you have to find the things that he will thrive in the weight room and push those on him, because that's going to elevate his game. I tried something new with tennis last year, and I was nervous to try it. And I was like, man, let's see how it goes. But we had a great year. My tennis team was by and large a lot of foreign dudes, a lot of Europeans. We had some guys from Norway, had a guy from Japan. So a lot of internationals, and they're not used to lifting. And that's one team that has sometimes pushed back with weight training, where it's like, well, the pros just do a bunch of bands and stuff like that. So one thing I did, I said, okay, I'm not going to make these guys put a bar on their back for most of the year. And what I went to was my main movement pattern for squats was I used the K-box. I used K-box squat pretty much year round. One, I got them to buy into it really fast, and they loved it, man. But I was like, damn, these guys are thriving with the K-box. So I'm like, I'm just going to keep it, and we're going to ride it all year. And what I saw on the force plates doing the biweekly testing is their power was going up. Power per the newtons per kilogram was going up, and their mid-thigh pull, they were also getting stronger on that. So it was a good realization of something I had in mind where I was like, I don't need to necessarily put a bar on their back to get them stronger. There's other ways to do it. And so I think that's where the technology piece is going to come in and play bigger roles, right? These force plates have been sweet because I have cross country still. That's one team I can't do a 1 rep back squat with these kids, man. They might the risk to injury reward is too high. But force plate testing, I'm able to see, are they getting stronger? Yes. Okay, then what we're doing is working. Let's keep with that without them having to ever feel like, oh, shoot, I got a strength coach and he's going to make me do heavy weights. It's like, no, my job is to help you stay healthy, give you longevity in the sport, and let's get stronger in the areas that you need to maximize your capacity in your sport. I think that's where the tech is coming to play a bigger and bigger role every year.
And I think you kind of like alluded to it, like strength is no longer just depicted by the squat, bench, and dead.
Yeah, 100%. There are so many other ways, and it could be, like I said, you could have teams that don't touch a weight bar, a bar the entire year, but they got stronger. There's other methodologies, and it's about exploring that. So I'm having a lot of fun this offseason, man, exploring a lot of like rotational stuff, rotational power, and I want to incorporate that more into like my tennis team and beach volleyball being one of the new teams. And yeah, there's a lot of sweet exercises that go back to what's the movement pattern, what am I trying to get out of it? That should help them out.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Then any final advice for young athletes aspiring to reach the collegiate level? So we've got, a couple of kids, looking to crack into the collegiate level. As you mentioned, you've got some international athletes at the moment, student athletes. What would be your advice for them if they're looking to crack into it?
I would say, one, there's obviously a talent component and some genetics into that, but having worked with a lot of different coaches and been involved here and there, like with recruiting calls and recruiting visits, is most coaches want a kid that's going to be coachable. And that means it's a kid that is willing to listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should use them to that ratio. A lot of kids that come in that don't thrive here that I've seen are talented, but they're the ones that talk back. They're the ones that coach is trying to correct something and they have an excuse for what the coach is telling them. Like, hey, you did this, this, and this. It could be basketball. Like, this girl set the screen for you. I wanted you to cut right for this reason. And the girl will be like, well, yeah, but I saw this person over there doing that. And it's like, no, just be quiet and let them coach you and take what they're telling you. So you have to be coachable and you have to have a strong work ethic. And the strong work ethic to me means being willing to try things and to put effort into it. With a lot of athletes that come in, I always tell them, I'm 100% okay if you can't do something I ask you. But what I can't tolerate is that you don't try. If you just give up on something, like, no, we need you to try. From a physical development standpoint, is if you're a younger athlete, young enough, expose yourself to different sports. I think that goes a long way. One, to become more athletic, because I think athleticism in and of itself is a hard thing to teach. That's almost something you pick up in your childhood the more you do other sports. Like, I see a lot of kids that, the weight room, they look great kids. I have an example. We had a baseball guy a couple of years back, right? Big, strong kid in here. Really, he looked athletic until I saw him play pickup basketball. Can't move sideways. Couldn't shoot the ball. I was like, whoa, this doesn't fit. Like, this guy looks athletic. He was not athletic, but he had specialized in baseball his whole life. So he didn't have other basic movement patterns in his toolbox. He couldn't side shuffle well. He couldn't do crossover stuff with the hips, like rotate the hips. So those things get harder and harder to teach the older you get. So,
yeah. And one thing you kind of alluded to was the intent as well. Like, kids need to be putting max intent into whether it's play or the sport itself, and that's what's going to help drive the athleticism component as well. If they're just like, if they're not trying their hardest or they're putting as much effort as they can in, it's like, how do you expect to get faster or to kick the ball further or throw harder if you're not putting some level of intent or high level of intent into what your actions are.
Yeah, and that goes back to your question earlier, right? That's the mental side of it. Like if you really have a love for the sport and you want to get to a high level, then absolutely. When you step into a practice, weight room, whatever it is that you're doing, that needs to have your full attention. You don't need to be thinking about, what am I doing an hour after this? I'm going to go get some food. It's like, no, man, I need your mind here. Like today we're going to do testing or whatever it is. Your mind needs to be locked into today and not what happened this morning. Now it's what's going to happen later. And that goes up to, I've seen that a lot with high level athletes as you have, I'm sure, like guys that like are Olympians and stuff, they struggle with mental stuff as well, with performance anxiety, but ultimately they're able to most of the time just put it by the wayside when it's time to compete and worry about that stuff later on, and they can lock into that moment.
Yeah. I think that's probably a big one is the full intention, or giving full attention to what you're doing, discussing, what am I doing later on today? Just having a general just presence in the moment for that hour lift, whatever it may be, or 2-hour training session. Like you can have those moments where you do switch off in between sets or in between exercises or drills, which is totally fine. It's normal. We only have like a core amount of concentration, max concentration for 30 minutes a day, max. Yeah. Obviously, we do need to switch off to some degree. Otherwise, we just fatigue ourselves with that.
That's a good point, man. I'm going to touch on this really quick. I think one of the strategies I use and by and large here in the whole staff is our warm-ups. So we always do our warm-ups, our lighter stuff at the beginning, whatever, we're doing movement prep, and then we ramp up the intensity of the warm-up leading into the first lift. But I'm very transparent with my athletes. I tell them at the beginning, it's like, hey, when you guys come in for warm-up, I need you locked in, but we start slow. So that's the time, you could be talking to your teammates a little bit here and there. But as the warm-up is getting harder, you're going to be a little bit more out of breath because I want you talking less and starting to focus more on what's at hand. So my warm-up 10, 15 minutes, but I give them that chance within that to get out all the small talk you're going to do. As it progresses, start focusing and know what we got at hand. And then after the warm-up, we bring them in and say, here's the main parts of the lift today. Here's the purpose. Here's why we're doing it. Let's do it with some intent. Let's go.
The one thing I like to do with the younger kids, 12 and 13 years old, because their attention's all over the shop, is I'll always, because we're doing a lot of plyometrics, so we do with our swimmers. So I like to do some running component because I want to be able to teach speed, right? Obviously, in the pool, there's only so much speed. Like you're moving like 2 meters a second, whilst on land, it's obviously a lot faster. And then my other coach, Billy, he does a lot of jump work. And what we do is we make minor tweaks each time. So they have to, in order to execute the skill well, they have to actually be locked into the moment. So kind of like inadvertently tricking them that they have to pay more attention to executing the skill. Because when I do it, Billy does his drills. Like obviously we've practiced and rehearsed it. We want to nail it every time. And it's like, now you got to focus now. So we kind of like tease and antagonize them. It's like, well, that wasn't great because what are you doing? You're talking to Bob and Jane next to you. So we kind of tease them to really execute it well in that side, and that's where we start to get more intent. So with the younger ones, we kind of like tease and prod them a little bit more because they want to get better. But we say for example, if we talk to an 18, 19-year-old, they kind of know that they need to lock in. They understand that. But 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, they're talking about what happened in the schoolyard with Sally. That's their life at the moment. So we like to trick them to that point where we increase the complexity of the skills, but then they won't even realize what they're really developing until later on down the track, because now we've got all our 11, 12, 13-year-olds swimming at the state level, and they're beating everyone off the blocks from all the speed and power development and jump technique work that they've been doing for the last 8 to 10 months. And then coaches the coaches are happy, the kids are happy that they're moving a lot better off the blocks, and then they can transition up into the more developed squads later on down the track.
That's cool. I like that trick, man. I think another one we use as a staff is when we bring them in, especially when you have bigger teams, right? Some kids are just dozing off in the background when you're giving instructions, is we like to call out 2 or 3 questions during the talk so that I know their focus is on. Like I might be saying, hey, our primary lift today is whatever, hang clean pulls, and we got 5 sets of 2. You're going to start light, finish heavy. And then I might pause and be like, Taylor, how many sets are we doing today? So I know, like, oh, shoot, so he might call on me, so I need to pay attention. So we try to set that habit at the beginning of the semester.
Yeah, I'll probably end up doing that, calling individual athletes out. What I like to do is like, does everyone know what a hollow hold is? And everyone's like, no. And then one person knows, puts their hand up. All right, you're going to demonstrate for the group.
Yes, I love that, man. Making them demo. That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, it makes my life easier as a coach.
That's true.
Cool. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and insights into today's podcast. If you did find this podcast really educational and helpful, please like, share, subscribe, all the normal things on the social media platforms. Leave a 5-star review as well. We're really looking to promote youth athlete development. I think it's still a neglected area and still at a high level misunderstood. And as we start closing the gap and on that specifically, and Jaime, appreciate your time. I know our time zones are completely different, but nonetheless, it's nice to catch up.
Likewise, man. I know it's early for you over there, so I'm glad we can make this work. Love talking about this field, man, and I think it's awesome what you're doing with the youth movement. So keep at it.
Cool. Until the next one, see you then.
You have just listened to the Inner Athlete Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.